The morning light filtered softly through the kitchen window of the Caldwell home in Highland Park, casting long pale stripes across the counter where Teresa stood slicing cheese with steady, practiced movements. It was barely 7. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rush of the shower upstairs where Andrew was finally getting ready for work. Teresa already had 2 cups of coffee placed on the table, one for her husband, and was pouring a third when Caroline's footsteps came down the stairs. Caroline slid into her chair with her phone already in hand, thumbs tapping, eyes unfocused. "Mom, do you have $15,000 before payday? My commission was delayed, and I have to renew my fitness membership," she said, never looking up. Her tone was routine, confident, as if she were asking for the salt. Teresa didn't sigh. She didn't even pause. She wiped her hands, opened her banking app, and transferred the money with a few quick taps. "Done," she said quietly, her voice soft but tired. Caroline murmured a distracted "thanks," her gaze fixed on her screen. Teresa placed breakfast in front of her daughter, though she knew Caroline would barely touch it before rushing out. Andrew came down a few minutes later, tying his shoes, not glancing at the spread she'd prepared. "Running late," he muttered. He took the coffee she had poured, didn't taste the eggs, didn't ask how she slept. He hadn't asked in years. Teresa watched him leave with a small nod, wiping crumbs from the table before sitting down for the first time that morning. By 8, she was already on her way to the office, blending into the quiet morning crowd boarding the Green Line. She stood, holding a rail as the train lurched forward, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. A woman beside her scrolled through pictures of beaches, turquoise water, white sand, palm trees arcing over bright horizons. The images glowed on the screen, and something about them caught Teresa's attention. When she sat down, she pulled out her own phone and opened a travel page she had glanced at days before. Maldives. The same soft blue photographs over water villas, private decks leading down into glassy lagoons. It had been 3 years since the Caldwells had taken a vacation together, and that trip had been to a modest lake cabin up north. Nothing extravagant, nothing restful. Andrew had complained about the drive, Caroline had complained about the mosquitoes, and Nick had disappeared into video games. Still, Teresa remembered a moment, just one, when they'd all laughed over burned marshmallows. It had been a long time since she'd seen that. Maybe a trip could fix things, she thought. Maybe if she gave them something beautiful, somewhere far and calm, they might remember how to be a family again. By the time she arrived at the office downtown, the idea had planted itself firmly in her mind. The day passed in a blur of spreadsheets and client calls. By 6, most of her co-workers had gone home, but Teresa stayed. She always stayed. Extra projects, freelance reconciliations, anything that could bring in a little more income. She needed to check how much she could realistically save. Maldives wasn't cheap, not even close. But if she worked late and cut back on the bathroom renovation she'd been planning, maybe. By 9, she stepped back into the cold Minnesota night and made her way to the train again. Her phone buzzed with small, familiar messages. "Mom, where are the winter coats?" "Mom, can you send 5,000 for a taxi? It's too cold to wait for the bus." "Mom, have you seen my blue dress shirt?" She answered them all with the same tired patience she always carried. When she got home, the house was dark. A note from Andrew lay on the counter. Went to alumni meetup. Back late. The meat he'd said he would thaw was still frozen. The trash hadn't been taken out. The flowers on the table were dry and drooping. Teresa heated a bowl of leftover soup, washed the dishes, folded laundry, and finally sat down at her laptop. She opened a detailed budgeting spreadsheet and began typing. If she tightened every corner, skipped weekends, and accepted a heavier workload, 4 months. She could make it happen in 4 months. The clock read 12:17 a.m. by the time she closed the laptop. Her shoulders ached. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes burned with exhaustion. But she allowed herself one last look at the picture of a sunlit villa suspended above impossible blue water. They'll love it, she told herself, and maybe, just maybe, they'll love each other again. For the next 4 months, Teresa's life narrowed into a tight, unforgiving rhythm that began long before sunrise. At 5 every morning, her alarm rang in the dim quiet of the house. She would rise slowly, joints stiff from too little sleep, and head straight to the kitchen to start coffee and boil eggs before anyone else stirred. The house was always a little messy now. Shoes scattered near the entryway, plates left in the sink overnight, laundry piling in corners because no one but her ever seemed to notice. She picked up everything in silence, the motions automatic. By 6, she was already seated at her laptop with a blanket over her shoulders, working through freelance bookkeeping assignments she'd taken on to fill the gap between her salary and the Maldives budget. Her eyes stung from the blue light, her fingers cramped from long nights of typing, but she kept going. Every dollar mattered. Every hour she worked brought the trip closer. The rest of the house woke gradually. Doors slamming, water running, hurried footsteps. But no one asked why she was already exhausted before the day had even begun. Caroline rarely came into the kitchen for breakfast. She rushed past with makeup half done, shouting from the stairs, "Mom, did you see my black coat? The long one. I swear it was in the closet." A moment later, "Also, can you transfer 1,000? My card is acting up and I need a lift." Nick, still groggy from late-night gaming, would wander in holding an empty cereal box. "Mom, we're out of everything again. Can you grab groceries tonight?" He didn't look up from his phone. Andrew left the house the same way he returned, briefcase in hand, distracted, tapping away at emails even during breakfast. He didn't comment on the growing shadows under Teresa's eyes or her increasingly slow movements. If anything, he seemed irritated when she didn't immediately answer a question about insurance forms or the utility bill. Their calls and messages continued throughout her workday. "Mom, do you have my blue shirt? Mom, can you send me $300? It's an emergency. Mom, how do you access the family Netflix? Mom, why isn't the dryer working?" Some days she felt like an invisible switchboard, nothing but a series of buttons to press and problems to solve. Her coworkers noticed she stayed late every night, but they assumed she was ambitious, dedicated. No one saw the faint tremor in her hands when she lifted her coffee cup. No one knew that she was using her lunch breaks to research budget airlines, travel points, and resort discounts. She kept spreadsheets on her phone, updating them during metro rides. She skipped dinners out with colleagues. She walked home some nights instead of taking the bus to save a few dollars. The Maldives fund grew steadily, painfully. By mid-February, her body began to show the strain. There were mornings when she had to steady herself against the counter before starting breakfast, moments when her vision blurred past the columns of numbers on her screen. The doctor's appointment she'd meant to schedule kept slipping further down her to-do list. She told herself she just needed a weekend of rest after the trip was booked, after she finished this month's freelance work, after she cleaned the house. But weekends never came. Not really. Saturday mornings were devoured by laundry and catching up on errands no one else bothered with. Sundays were for meal prep, organizing the pantry, paying bills. She tried to sit down once, just once, and watch the snow fall outside the living room window. But Caroline barged in asking for cash, and Andrew wanted help with tax forms. And Nick complained the Wi-Fi wasn't working. No one asked how she felt. No one noticed the heaviness in her breath when she climbed the stairs, or the way she pressed a hand to her chest after lifting grocery bags out of the car. When she excused herself early one evening, leaning against the hallway wall because the room had begun to spin, Andrew barely looked up. "If you're tired, go to bed earlier," he said. already returning to his laptop. Teresa nodded, the familiar sting rising behind her eyes. She had been going to bed earlier for months. It simply never mattered. Still, every night at her desk, she reopened the spreadsheet, recalculating, adjusting, pushing herself harder. The Maldives trip was nearly fully funded. Only 2 more freelance projects. Only a few more sleepless weeks. It will be worth it, she told herself. For them, it will be worth it. But her body was quietly warning her in ways she chose not to hear. It happened on a Thursday morning. One of those quiet Midwestern dawns when the house still carried the chill of overnight frost. Teresa was in the kitchen, standing over the stove, whisking eggs the way she did every morning. The pan hissed softly. A faint breeze from the window brushed her cheek. Everything felt ordinary, routine, predictable, almost comforting, until it wasn't. She reached for the salt, her hand steady at first. Then, suddenly, her fingers trembled. The shaker slipped from her grasp, clattering across the counter. She frowned, flexing her hand as if shaking off a cramp. Maybe she had slept wrong. Maybe she had worked too late again. She tried to call out to Andrew upstairs, but the words snagged in her throat, coming out thick and slurred. The sound startled her. She touched her lips. They felt strange, heavy, as if they no longer belonged to her. Her knees buckled. The world spun sideways as she crashed to the floor, her cheek hitting the cold tile. The pan on the stove hissed louder. Her vision blurred at the edges, brightening and dimming in rapid waves. She tried to push herself up, but her right arm wouldn't respond. Her breath quickened, shallow, panicked. "Andrew!" She tried again, but it came out as a broken whisper. Upstairs. She heard footsteps, not running, just regular, unhurried footsteps heading toward the hallway. Then Andrew's voice floated down, irritated. "Teresa? Did you burn something again? We're already behind, remember? The Maldives reservations. Did you finish checking the dates?" He entered the kitchen, still adjusting his tie. The sight of his wife on the floor stopped him cold. "Teresa." His voice cracked, fear slicing through the morning's stillness. He dropped to his knees beside her, shaking her gently. "Teresa, can you hear me? What happened?" Her lips moved, but only a fractured sound escaped. Andrew fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. "My wife, she's collapsed," he said breathlessly. "She can't speak. She can't move her arm. Please hurry." The dispatcher's calm voice tried to anchor him, but his eyes darted between Teresa and the stove, where breakfast was beginning to burn. The sharp smell filled the room. Within minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the neighborhood. Paramedics rushed in, lifting Teresa carefully onto the stretcher. Her gaze flickered, desperate, trying to follow the movements around her, trying to stay conscious. Andrew hovered beside them, his panic barely contained. She's been working a lot. Maybe she didn't sleep. We're planning a big trip, and she's been stressed. Maldives. For months of saving. Maybe it's exhaustion." The paramedic didn't answer. He only looked at Teresa with practiced seriousness. Facial droop, right-sided weakness. "Slurred speech," he said to his partner. "Possible stroke. Let's move." The words hit Andrew like a blow. At United Hospital's emergency entrance, the fluorescent lights washed everything in harsh white as the stretcher rolled through double doors. Nurses called out vitals, machines beeped wildly. Andrew was pushed aside, forced to wait while the curtain was pulled around her. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, Dr. Raymond Lee stepped out, clipboard in hand, expression grave. "Mr. Caldwell," he began gently, "your wife has suffered an ischemic stroke." The phrase echoed in Andrew's mind, foreign and heavy. Stroke? But she was fine an hour ago. She was making breakfast. Dr. Lee gave a small nod. "Symptoms can appear suddenly. The clot affected the left hemisphere of her brain. That's why she can't move her right side or speak clearly. Andrew swallowed hard. She'll recover, right? We have plans. We have a trip coming up. She just needs rest. The doctor's tone remained calm but firm. The next 24 hours are critical. She'll be moved to the ICU. Her recovery will depend on how quickly her brain responds to treatment. The curtain pulled back for a moment. Teresa lay pale and motionless, an oxygen tube across her face, monitors tracking each fragile breath. Her eyes fluttered weakly, searching for something familiar. Andrew stepped closer, taking her left hand, the only one that squeezed back. For the first time in years, the house, the money, the Maldives, everything he thought mattered suddenly felt small. But even in that moment, a flicker of worry crossed his features. What would happen to the trip now? What would happen to the plans she had worked so hard to make? Teresa's gaze dimmed as exhaustion pulled her under, and the quiet beeping of the heart monitor became the only steady sound in the room. Teresa had been in the ICU for barely a day when the rhythm of machines became the new soundtrack of her world. Steady beeps, soft hisses, the occasional clip of a nurse adjusting and foreline. She floated in and out of awareness, her thoughts slow, heavy, drifting through a fog she couldn't escape. Late that afternoon, the door to her ICU room slid open and Caroline swept in first, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Nick followed behind her, hood pulled over his head, eyes glued to his phone. Andrew lagged last, his expression tight and drawn, though whether from fear or frustration was hard to tell. Caroline barely glanced at the monitors or the oxygen line or the way her mother's right hand lay limp on the blanket. She moved straight to the bedside with an impatient sigh. "Mom!" she said loudly, as if volume could bridge neurological damage. "So, what about the Maldives?" Nick looked up from his phone. "Yeah, seriously, Mom. We've been planning this for months. Are we still going? Or what?" Teresa's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief cutting through the haze. She tried to form words, to say she couldn't move, couldn't think clearly, couldn't even swallow water without help. But her lips parted only enough for a garbled sound to escape. Andrew shot them both a warning look. "Not now," he muttered. "She needs rest." But Caroline crossed her arms. "Rest? Dad, we've already booked time off work. I've told everyone. And do you know how much I spent on clothes for this trip?" She turned back to her mother. "Mom, just blink if we're still going next month." Teresa blinked, but not for Caroline's reasons. Her vision blurred, her throat tightened, and humiliation washed over her. That was all they cared about. Maldives, clothes, schedules, everything except her. A nurse stepped in briefly, checking vitals, adjusting medication. She offered a gentle smile to Teresa, but sensed the tension. "Try to keep visits calm and reassuring," she said quietly before leaving. The room fell into uneasy silence. Then Caroline reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers clipped neatly together. Legal documents, forms with long paragraphs and signature lines marked with bright yellow tabs. "Okay, Mom," Caroline said briskly. "We need you to sign something. Just routine stuff. Financial power of attorney. So we can handle everything while you rest." Andrew stiffened. "Caroline, this isn't the time. This is exactly the time," she snapped. "If she can't talk, someone needs to manage her accounts. Otherwise, everything will freeze. Mortgages, bills, the Maldives reservation." Nick leaned forward. "Yeah. If we lose the booking, that's on you, Dad. Mom already paid most of it, right? We need access." Teresa stared at the documents, her heartbeat picking up speed. She couldn't speak, couldn't lift her right hand, couldn't defend herself. The air seemed to thicken around her. She tried to shake her head, but her neck barely obeyed. Caroline took her mother's left hand, the only one that still moved, and guided it toward the papers. "It's fine, Mom. You want us to help, don't you? Just sign here. And here. Tears stung Teresa's eyes. Her fingers trembled, curling weakly away. She tried again to speak, but the sound dissolved into a trapped breath, half sob, half plea. Andrew rubbed a hand across his face. He looked conflicted, but tiredness or guilt held him still. Maybe she should rest, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Caroline ignored him. No, this is necessary. Mom, please stop making this harder. Just a signature. She pressed the pen into Teresa's fingers. Teresa's grip failed. The pen slipping to the sheets with a soft thud. Caroline exhaled sharply, irritation rising. Unbelievable. Mom, you always do this. You freeze up at the worst time. Nick muttered, this is going to ruin everything. Their mother lay helpless, unable to cry out, unable to push their hands away, unable to protect herself from the people she trusted most. It was betrayal, quiet, calculated, wrapped in the tone of responsibility. Caroline gathered the papers with a huff. Fine. We'll come back tomorrow. She'll have to sign it eventually. As they left the room, the faint scent of disinfectant drifted back in with the closing door. Teresa stared at the ceiling, her pulse thudding weakly in her ears, her body aching not from the stroke, but from the realization that her family's first concern had not been her survival. It had been the Maldives, and now control. The soft beeping of the monitor became the only witness to her helplessness. 3 days passed in the ICU, each one blurring into the next beneath the steady pulse of monitors and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Teresa could not tell morning from evening except through the shifting patterns of light that filtered through the blinds. Nurses came and went, Dr. Lee checked her charts with quiet professionalism. She slept in fragments, drifting in and out of a fog that made time feel distant and strange. Her family visited only once during those 3 days. They arrived mid-morning. Andrew in a crisp vacation shirt, Caroline dragging 2 enormous suitcases, and Nick tapping on his phone with the same restless energy he always carried. The sight of luggage alone made Teresa's breath falter. The bright tropical patterns, the rolling wheels, the travel tags, they struck her like a physical blow. They were leaving. Andrew stepped forward first, his expression strained, as if bracing himself for an uncomfortable conversation. Teresa, he began, his tone unnaturally cheerful. Dr. Lee says you're stable. You just need rest. A lot of rest. She blinked slowly, trying to lift her good hand. It moved only a few inches. Caroline spoke before Andrew could continue. Mom, the Maldives package. It's already paid for. Non-refundable. You know how expensive it was. She tightened her ponytail with a crisp tug. We can't just lose all that money. Nick chimed in without looking up, and I already told my friends I'm going. No way I'm staying home now. Teresa tried to speak, to ask them to stay, to tell them she was scared, truly scared in a way she had never been before. But the words twisted in her throat, coming out as a broken sound that made Caroline wince. Andrew reached for her hand, the left one, the only one she could still control. He patted it gently, but the gesture felt hollow, rehearsed. The tickets are booked. Honey, he said softly, echoing the exact sentiment from the original story, the one carved into this moment like a bruise. The reservations are already paid for, so just focus on getting better. A hollow ringing filled Teresa's ears. Paid for, as if that excused everything. She searched Andrew's face for hesitation, for guilt, for flicker of the husband she once knew. But his eyes slid away, toward the door, toward the plans waiting outside this room. Caroline set the unsigned power of attorney papers on the bedside table. We'll come back for this when you're ready, she said, though her voice held no real expectation. Try not to stress. It'll slow your recovery. Nick zipped his backpack and muttered, "We should get going. Security lines are terrible this time of year." Andrew nodded. "They're right. We should leave soon if we want to make the flight." It was the final confirmation. They were truly going to the Maldives, going without her, going as if her collapsing in the kitchen, as if her stroke, as if her paralysis meant nothing more than a scheduling inconvenience. Teresa felt the weight of her body sink deeper into the mattress. She wanted to scream, "How can you leave me now?" She wanted to beg, "Please don't go. I'm scared." She wanted to reach for them, hold on to them, stop them from walking out of this room and out of her life. But she couldn't lift her arm. She couldn't form the words. Her voice was trapped inside her, muffled, drowned by the beeping machines. Caroline leaned down and kissed the air somewhere near Teresa's forehead, not quite touching. "We'll take pictures," she said lightly. "Maybe we'll even bring you a souvenir." Andrew squeezed her hand one last time. "We'll check in when we land." And then, just like that, they left. Their footsteps faded down the hallway. A moment later, the sound of rolling suitcases tapped against the tile floor. The elevator chimed. Silence closed around her like a cold blanket. Teresa stared at the doorway long after it emptied, her gaze locked on the space where her family had last stood. Her chest burned. Grief, disbelief, abandonment merging into a single sharp ache she could neither express nor escape. Outside her window, a late winter snow flurry drifted past. Inside the ICU, machines beeped steadily, indifferent and rhythmic. For the first time in her life, Teresa Caldwell felt truly, unbearably alone. The ICU night shift was quiet, lit only by dim overhead bulbs and the blinking constellation of monitors. Nurse Elaine Morris moved through the unit with practiced calm, checking vitals, adjusting forelines, and offering soft words of reassurance to patients who drifted between fear and sedation. When she stepped into Teresa Caldwell's room, she paused. There was something different in the air, a kind of heaviness she'd begun to recognize after decades in critical care. Teresa was awake, eyes open but unfocused, drifting in a quiet sorrow that Elaine had seen in stroke patients before, not because of pain, but because of abandonment. "Evening, Teresa," Elaine said gently. "I'm just here to check your meds." As she took Teresa's blood pressure, she noticed the stack of papers left on the bedside table, neatly clipped documents with signature tabs still untouched. A bright yellow note stuck out from the top page. In bold letters, it read, "Power of Attorney." Elaine wasn't a lawyer, but she had worked long enough to recognize the pattern. Family members sweeping in with urgent forms when a patient was at their weakest. Her jaw tightened. "Did someone ask you to sign these?" she asked softly, knowing full well Teresa could not answer. Teresa's eyes flicked toward the papers, then back up, filled with a helplessness that made Elaine's chest tighten. She skimmed the documents. General durable power of attorney, financial authority, transfer rights, immediate effect, no witness signatures, no notary, no hospital advocate present. And Teresa was in no condition to consent, not physically, not cognitively. "This isn't right," Elaine murmured. "This shouldn't even be in here." Teresa's breath hitched, just barely. A tremor of relief or fear passed through her. Elaine stepped out into the hallway, her expression sharpened with resolve. She had seen families try to drain accounts, seize properties, or wrestle control from vulnerable patients before. Not on her watch. Not this time. She pulled out her phone, scrolling until she found the number Teresa had listed under emergency legal. Victor Sanderson, family attorney. She called. The line picked up almost immediately. Victor Sanderson speaking. "Mr. Sanderson, this is Nurse Elaine Morris at United Hospital," she said quietly. "I'm calling regarding your client, Teresa Caldwell. She suffered an ischemic stroke. Her family left documents financial power of attorney papers, and signed, "I'm concerned." A beat of silence, then a low, controlled reply, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." Victor arrived dressed in a charcoal overcoat dusted with snow, his briefcase in hand, expression severe but focused. Elaine met him outside the ICU doors and handed him the documents. His eyes flashed with something between anger and disappointment. These cannot legally be presented to a patient in her condition. They know that. They absolutely know that. He entered Teresa's room, standing beside her bed with a steadiness that softened the moment. "Teresa," he said gently, "I'm here now. I'm going to take care of this." Tears welled in her eyes. Victor flipped through her medical chart, checking neurological notes, mental status evaluations, and attending physician comments. Everything confirmed what he already suspected. Teresa had been incapacitated at the time her family pushed the documents toward her. He closed the chart firmly. "These are null," he said. "Completely void." Elaine exhaled with quiet relief. Victor continued, "And we're going to make sure no one tries this again." He spent the next hour in the hospital's family consultation room, making urgent calls to the county clerk, drafting an emergency revocation notice, moving to freeze any pending POA claims, and notifying the hospital's legal department to block any further attempts. Elaine watched him move with precise, almost surgical anger, controlled, but unmistakable. When he returned to Teresa, he softened again. "You're safe," he told her. "Everything they tried is reversed." Her good hand tightened faintly around the blanket, and, he added, voice gentler still, "We're updating your documents to reflect what you told me months ago, just as you wanted." He pulled out a prepared form, a new will. One Teresa had discussed long before any of this happened, but had never finalized. Her estate, her savings, her home, allocated not to the family that had abandoned her, but to a charitable fund she had dreamed of starting, and a small but meaningful bequest to the nurse who had shown her kindness in her darkest hour. Elaine froze. "Mr. Sanderson." "I don't need. It's not charity," Victor said quietly. "It's gratitude." Teresa blinked slowly, tears slipping down her temples. This was the moment, the turning of the tide, the first breath of justice, the quiet beginning of her return to herself. For the first time since collapsing in the kitchen, Teresa Caldwell no longer felt alone. 3 days after Victor revoked the power of attorney and secured her accounts, the ICU room was quieter. Teresa had been transferred from critical status to a monitored recovery room. Her speech was still slurred, her right arm still unresponsive, but her mind, fogged for days, was finally beginning to clear. The sun had barely risen when her hospital iPad began to vibrate with an incoming video call. Caroline's name flashed across the screen, then Nick's, then Andrew's, one after another. Elaine walked in at that moment and raised an eyebrow. "Seems urgent. Want me to answer?" Teresa blinked once, yes. Elaine tapped accept. Immediately, the screen filled with chaos. Caroline at the Malé International Airport, makeup smeared from sweat and humidity, hair frizzed, her voice shrill and cracking. Behind her, the endless queue of confused tourists snaked toward the payment counters. "Mom, Mom, finally, why aren't the cards working? They're saying payment declined." Twice. Nick pushed into the frame, shirt already untucked, sunburn forming on his neck despite being nowhere near a beach. "Mom, what did you do?" he snapped. "I'm standing here like an idiot while everyone stares." Caroline yelled over him. "We can't check into the resort. They won't even let us get on the shuttle. My credit card's blocked. Dad's card is frozen. And the bank says there's a legal hold on the accounts." The camera jostled violently, switching angles as Andrew tried to steady the phone. He looked rattled, sweat clinging to his collar. "Teresa," he said in a low, urgent voice, "something's wrong with the accounts." Teresa's breath came slow and shallow, but she lifted her gaze. She couldn't say much, not yet, but the words that formed were enough. Accounts are frozen. Caroline's face contorted. What do you mean frozen? She shouted so loudly that people in the background turned. They said someone revoked access. Mom, why would you do that? We're stranded here. Do you understand that? Stranded. Nick leaned in, furious. Are you serious right now? We spent months planning this trip. You said you'd take care of everything. And now you pull this? After everything we did for you. Elaine frowned, murmuring under her breath. Everything you did for her? She's the one who. But she stopped herself. Caroline stabbed a finger toward the camera. Mom, you need to fix this today. Call the bank. Call the resort. Do something. Teresa tried to speak, forming the first syllable with effort. No, Caroline's jaw dropped. No. Mom, we are literally stuck thousands of miles from home. You can't do this to us. You're being selfish, Nick finished sharply. Honestly, Mom, this is typical. You always find a way to ruin things. Elaine stiffened, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Andrew swallowed hard. Teresa, we just need the hold lifted. Then we can get settled and figure things out later. Please. Teresa's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. A clarity she hadn't felt in months. Elaine stepped forward, voice firm but polite. Mr. Caldwell, your wife is recovering from a major ischemic stroke. Her accounts were frozen as a legal protection measure. She cannot make financial decisions at this time. She cannot call banks. She cannot authorize transactions. She is under medical care. Caroline exploded. This is ridiculous. Mom can fix it. She just doesn't want to. Nick scoffed. Unbelievable. She's doing this out of spite. Teresa's breathing wavered, hurt flickering through her eyes, but she didn't look away from the screen. Elaine's tone sharpened. Your mother nearly died, and you're yelling about vacation plans. Caroline snapped back. Stay out of this. This is family business. Victor's voice unexpectedly entered the frame behind Elaine. He'd arrived to check on Teresa's legal updates. Actually, he said calmly, stepping into view, this is legal business, and your mother is fully protected. Any attempts to force her into financial action will result in immediate legal consequences. Caroline's face drained of color. Nick muttered something under his breath. Andrew closed his eyes, defeated. We'll call back, he said quietly, and ended the call. The room fell silent again. The iPad screen went dark. And for the first time, Teresa felt something settle inside her. Not triumph, not revenge, but justice. Quiet, steady, inevitable. Karma had reached the Maldives before they even touched the water. 2 weeks after the Maldives incident, Teresa was transferred from United Hospital to the Courage Kenny Rehabilitation Institute, a place designed for slow miracles where people learned, step by step, how to rebuild the pieces of themselves that illness had taken. The move itself felt monumental. For the first time since the stroke, she wasn't surrounded by alarms and ICU shadows. Here, the hall smelled faintly of pine cleaner and warm oatmeal, and sunlight streamed in through wide windows overlooking the Mississippi. Teresa arrived in a wheelchair, her right side still paralyzed, her speech barely more than fractured whispers. But something in her eyes had changed. The fog was lifting, awareness was returning, and with it came determination. Nurse Elaine visited her that first morning, bringing a soft scarf and a reassuring smile. Rehab is hard, she said gently, but you're stronger than you think. Later that day, Victor Sanderson arrived carrying a slim leather briefcase and an expression of unwavering respect. He greeted her softly, taking care not to overwhelm her. Teresa, he said, setting the briefcase on a small table. I've prepared everything we discussed before. The revised will is signed. The power of attorney attempt is legally void. And he paused, watching her closely. You also asked me months ago to prepare divorce documents, just in case things reached a breaking point. I finished them. Her breath caught, slow, uneven, but she nodded. It was a weak nod, but it was unmistakably decisive. Victor placed the papers before her. We won't file anything until you tell me to. But they're ready. Teresa blinked once, firmly. She was ready. The rehab routine was grueling. Hours of repetitive motions. Micro-movements that looked insignificant to an observer, but required every ounce of her strength. A speech therapist sat with her each morning, teaching her how to form sounds again, stretching muscles that had forgotten their purpose. Say T, the therapist encouraged. T, Teresa whispered, the single syllable trembling from effort. In occupational therapy, she practiced gripping a spoon. Her fingers wouldn't close at first. Then, after days of strain and frustration, they curled, just a little, around the silver handle. She cried quietly, not from pain, but from victory. Walking was harder. A belt was strapped around her waist as a physical therapist guided her in slow steps across the parallel bars. One step, then another. Her legs shook, her breath trembled. But she kept going. Good, the therapist murmured. You're getting stronger. Teresa didn't answer, but her steady gaze said everything. During those weeks, Andrew called twice. Caroline sent a single text that read, When will you be back? We need to talk about bills. Nick didn't contact her at all. Teresa stopped checking her phone. Instead, she focused on learning to stand without trembling, on pronouncing her own name again, on recovering pieces of herself she had lost long before the stroke. As her strength returned, Victor guided her through the next step, moving out of the old house. Since she couldn't climb stairs or lift belongings, he coordinated everything with a small moving service. Elaine helped her pack personal items, clothes, photographs, her mother's quilt, the silver bracelet she'd worn on her wedding day. When the movers carried the last box out of the Highland Park house, Teresa asked to be wheeled to the threshold. She sat there quietly, taking in the shape of the doorway, the fading paint on the banister, the house she had sustained for decades, often alone. There was no anger on her face, no tears, only an exhale long and steady, a letting go. She moved into a small, accessible apartment in the North Loop, a bright corner unit with wide doorways and a view of the skyline. It was modest but warm. Hers, truly hers for the first time in years. Elaine helped her hang curtains. Victor stocked her refrigerator. A neighbor brought flowers. In that quiet new space, Teresa whispered the first clear sentence she'd spoken since the stroke. I'm still here. Not loud, not triumphant, just true. Her healing had begun, slowly, quietly, and entirely on her own terms. The snow had begun to melt in Minneapolis when Teresa heard the first unexpected knock on her North Loop apartment door. She had been practicing speech exercises that morning, slowly forming vowels with careful breaths, when the sound startled her. Visitors were rare. Only Elaine and Victor came regularly. When she opened the door with her left hand, she froze. Caroline stood there, bundled in an expensive winter coat, mascara smudged from crying, her shoulders shaking with emotion she had never shown before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Teresa simply stepped aside, allowing her daughter to enter. The apartment was warm, sunlight falling gently across the hardwood floor. Caroline looked around as if she didn't recognize the space, didn't recognize the version of her mother who lived here now, independent, quieter, steadier. "Mom," Caroline finally whispered, voice breaking. "Why did you do this? Why did you cut us out?" Teresa sat slowly on the couch, gesturing for Caroline to sit across from her. Her speech still carried the soft slur of recovery, but her words were clear. "You left me," she said quietly. Caroline flinched. "We didn't leave you. We didn't think it was that serious." "You went to the Maldives," Teresa continued, "and asked about the trip?" While I couldn't speak. Caroline pressed a hand to her forehead, tears welling. "Mom, I made mistakes. I get it, but I'm losing everything. My rent is overdue. The car payment bounced, and the bank says I don't have access to anything. I thought you would understand. You always helped. Always." Teresa's eyes softened, but they did not waver. "I taught you," she said slowly, "that I would fix everything. That was my mistake." Caroline shook her head, voice rising. "So what, this is punishment? This is payback? Mom, I'm your daughter." Teresa exhaled, steady and sad. "I love you, but love doesn't mean I fund your life forever." Caroline covered her face and sobbed, loud, unrestrained, collapsing into herself. Teresa watched, heart aching but resolute. When Caroline finally stood to leave, she paused at the door, eyes red. "I just wanted to understand," she whispered, and then she was gone. 2 days later, before Teresa finished her morning physical therapy, another knock came. This one loud, uneven, impatient. When she opened the door, Nick stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair unwashed, eyes darting nervously. "Mom," he said without greeting, stepping inside. "I need help. Real help." Teresa waited. Nick paced the room, agitation crackling off him. "Look, the Maldives thing wasn't my fault. Caroline handled all the money stuff. But I need cash. I'm trying to get my life together, but everything's a mess." Teresa tilted her head. "Job." Nick stopped pacing. "Mom, I'm 26. I'm trying, but things are rough. Rent is insane. No one wants to hire someone without experience. I need like a buffer. A few months. Maybe a year." Teresa looked at him with the same slow, aching clarity she had found in rehab. "You are 26, she said. "Not a child." Nick bristled. "You don't understand how hard it is." Teresa's voice remained calm. "I understand more than you think. I worked 3 jobs. I paid for school, for coats, for taxis, for your games, your classes, your rent. You never saw the cost, because I always paid it." Nick's expression flickered. Guilt, frustration, fear. "So you're just going to leave me hanging? After everything?" Teresa inhaled, gathering strength. "I can help you find a job," she said, "but no more money." He stared at her as if she had struck him. "What? Mom, no. I need money now, not some job hunt. I don't even know where to start." "I will help you start," she replied, "but I won't carry you anymore." Nick's voice rose, desperate. "This is cruel. You're choosing strangers over your own kids." Teresa shook her head gently. "I am choosing myself, and maybe someday you." For a moment, Nick looked like he might argue again, but something in her eyes, something steady, unmovable, stopped him. He turned, muttering under his breath, and slammed the door on his way out. Teresa remained seated, breathing deeply, not triumphant, not angry, just steady, for the first time in years. She had said no, and for the first time, no felt like freedom. Spring sunlight spilled across the bedroom floor of Teresa's North Loop apartment, a soft golden wash that made the space feel warmer than the lingering chill outside. Teresa stood in front of the full-length mirror, her left hand smoothing the front of a new dress, a simple knee-length navy wrap dress with light fabric that moved gently when she turned. She had chosen it carefully, wanting something elegant but comfortable, something that made her feel like the version of herself she was slowly rediscovering. Elaine sat nearby on the edge of the bed, lacing her shoes. "You look lovely," she said warmly. "Not too formal, not too plain. Confident." Teresa's lips curved into a small smile. Speech still required effort, but expression came easily now. Today was the opening ceremony of the new Life Center, the nonprofit program funded through Teresa's revised will, though she preferred not to think of it as a future inheritance, but as a legacy she was building while still alive. The center would offer post-stroke recovery support, counseling for caregivers, and financial guidance for patients blindsided by medical crises. Quiet work, necessary work, work fueled by her own journey through abandonment and rediscovery. Victor arrived a few minutes later, carrying a navy blazer for Teresa. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing it to her. "The forecast says it'll be cool near the river." Teresa nodded gratefully and slipped it on. The dark fabric contrasted softly with her light gray scarf, Elaine's gift from rehab. The scarf rested over her shoulder like a reminder of the people who had stood with her when her family hadn't. The drive to the center took them through downtown Minneapolis, past the river glinting under spring sunlight and the slow bustle of weekend pedestrians. When they reached the small, renovated building facing a quiet street near St. Anthony, Maine, Teresa paused outside the entrance, reading the sign for the first time. New Life Center, support for stroke survivors and families founded by. Teresa Caldwell, her chest tightened, not with pain, but with something blooming and warm. Inside, volunteers were arranging chairs, checking microphones, and placing brochures on buffet tables. A bouquet of soft white tulips, her favorite, sat on a small podium at the front. Light streamed through the tall windows, casting reflections along the polished wood floor. The brightness made her eyes water. She wasn't alone in the room for long. A hesitant knock sounded from the doorway. When Teresa turned, Nick stood there, hair trimmed, shirt clean, posture subdued. Not the frantic young man who had burst into her apartment weeks earlier, but someone softer, smaller, humbled by consequences he once thought would never touch him. "Mom," he said quietly. Victor and Elaine stepped aside, giving them space. Nick approached slowly, hands trembling just a little. I'm sorry." His voice broke. "For the Maldives. For yelling. For asking for money. For everything. I didn't understand what you went through." Teresa studied him, her expression unreadable but calm. Nick swallowed hard, gaze dropping. "I got a job," he said, forcing a small, hopeful smile. "Warehouse work. Night shifts. It's not much, but I'm trying." A long breath passed between them. Teresa reached out with her left hand and rested it briefly on his arm, a gesture of acknowledgement, not reconciliation, not yet, but recognition of his effort. "I'm glad," she whispered. Nick blinked rapidly, as if expecting more, expecting the old pattern of rescue. But Teresa didn't offer money, didn't offer to pay his rent, didn't promise anything beyond the gentle nod she gave him before stepping back. She was choosing peace, not rewind, acceptance, not erasure, a line drawn with kindness, not obligation. Nick exhaled shakily. "I'll see you soon?" Teresa nodded once. "Yes." He left quietly, shoulders hunched but lighter somehow. As though the world had shifted beneath him in a way he finally understood. Victor joined her at the podium a few minutes later. "Ready?" Teresa inhaled slowly, feeling the steady rise of her breath, something she had relearned the hard way. She lifted her chin. "Ready." Guests began to gather, doctors, neighbors, rehab therapists, volunteers. No family, but she didn't look for them. Today wasn't about who hadn't shown up. It was about who had, and who she had become. She stepped to the podium as the murmurs died down. Sunlight poured across her face through the tall Minnesota windows, haloing her in a soft glow. Her reflection flickered faintly in the glass. Stronger posture, clearer eyes, gentler features, a woman rebuilt from quiet courage. Teresa placed her hand on the podium, steady and sure. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation, a life rewritten, not with anger, but with clarity. Outside, the spring breeze